This video is going to walk through our third in-class essay on Jane Austen's passage from Northanger Abbey. Then we're going to look at the scoring rubric, and then we're going to look at some sample passages and essays relative to the scoring rubric. Let's start with the prompt. Jane Austen's novel Northanger Abbey opens with the following passage. Read the passage carefully, then, in a well-organized essay, analyze the literary techniques Austen uses to characterize Catherine Morland. To turn that into a question, so what literary techniques does the author use to characterize Catherine? One of the biggest issues I noticed as I was reading the essays is many of you would abandon the term literary techniques. As we've talked, you can organize your paper relative to the events or the moments in the passage, but you really need to come back to the literary techniques. That's the question. So instead of using her family or using the piano, talk about the piano as a metaphor, or talk about the details of her family or the imagery surrounding her childlike or boyish behavior. Don't just talk about her boyish behavior. Lots of you did this really well. Many of you would start to talk about the family and forget to talk about the imagery or the details or whatever else was associated with them. And this was reflected in the scores on the essays as well. Let's look at the scores and how they would be set up. Here's the scoring rubric. You can see on this side I have bold-faced words that describe an 8 or a 9, a 7 or a 6, a 5, a 4. And these are the words that are going through my mind and I want going through your mind when you're thinking about your writing. A 5 is going to have little or no elaboration. It's going to border on summary, minimal analysis with little insight. Notice the difference between the 5 is acceptable, not impressive. The 4 is unacceptable. Little or no original thought. Illogical or immature, not developed. You see this bold-faced line right here. The line between the 5 and the 4 is really the line between passing and not passing. I'd like to get us all above a 5 before test time, and there's no reason that we all can't be above a 5, and we'll be working throughout the rest of the course to get people up above the 5, people who aren't yet above that. But with this particular question, it came down to, were you looking at literary techniques? Because that's the question. If you weren't looking at literary techniques at all, technically you probably should have been down to a 4. But if the essay was really well written and you did focus on Catherine's complex character and how the author develops that character through different things in the text, then I did give you the 5 at this point, which is an 85, a B-. On the back of the rubric, or the second page here, we have all of those things from the front of the rubric broken out into certain descriptors: originality and acuity, thesis and organization, idea development, evidence, fluency of language and conventions, / vocab and grammar. The importance of these doesn't really go from top to bottom, though I would say vocab and grammar and language and conventions are the least important. The most important are probably going to be the two in the middle, thesis and organization and idea development. I have this color-coded relative to some of the sample essays that we're going to be looking at. So here are some of those sample essays. This is a 4-paragraph, and this document is going to be posted on the website so that you can see it yourself. And these are actual examples from essays written by you all on the test. This is a 4-paragraph, and you see my comments here. I'm not going to go through and read all of them to you. I try to use comments that describe why it was scored, where it was scored. And I've done this to show you the difference between the lines. That bold-faced line would pass right between the 4 and the 5. This it's using quotes, but it's only using them to summarize. And though this is true from the passage, the writer's talking about what the author does, but not explaining or developing how this makes sense or how it relates back to the character, really. They just tell me it does it. They're not showing me. The telling and not showing also occurs in the score 5, but they do go a little bit further to continue to link it back to ideas. Some of the things that holds this down are some wrong word usage, and that they don't really address the literary techniques as required in the prompt. They do eventually get down here to it, but they don't offer any examples of those, as I say in the comment. The score 6 essay, this is the whole essay, and it looks a lot shorter when it's all typed out like this. I think it was 2.5 pages written. is just at a score 6, and I walk through why. They do focus on literary devices, though they are kind of vague. They didn't have any adjectives in there, and you can do that. If you can come up with some good adjectives to work, then that's great. They walk through integrating text into their examples. They don't always develop the argument about the complexity as much as they should, and I'll make some of those comments here. They do attempt a transition, and if you look back at the scoring rubric, when it talks about thesis and organization, it says transitions are rarely or poorly used in the 5 versus the 6 or 7. Transitions may be more rudimentary rather than subtle. So they're using transition. It may not be great, but they recognize that they do need to use the transition. Further down here is an example of a thesis and a paragraph from an 8 example. This person actually had a line before details. I think they wanted to go back and put an adjective in there and never did. It's okay with me. I really like this. I did not annotate this one the way I've annotated the others because I thought it would be interesting for you if you wanted to go back to the rubric and look at the descriptors of the 8 and 9 and see where they are. I have already, in gray here, annotated this to show you where the 8 and 9 are. So the different colors of the highlights on the examples show you where they line up here. Of course, some of these you can't talk about. There's one where you just have the paragraph, so we can't say anything about the thesis, and so on. So the next steps with this is for you to look back at your own essay. I've given you your essay, and I've given you a grade on it, and I've not highlighted on the back what boxes you fit into. So if you know that I scored you at a 6 or a 7, your task now is to go back to that essay and highlight in this rubric. It shouldn't take you very long. Highlight in this rubric why you scored, where you scored. Be ready to talk about that tomorrow. What we want to do is look at, again, why you scored, where you scored, and then what are your next steps? What are your plans for growth so that when you go to write your next essay, you know what to do to improve. Thanks.